Okay, solving equations by factoring. So, first of all, okay, point 6 in our notes here. Okay, raise your hand and tell me what would 9 times 0 be. Raise your hand and tell me what 9 times 0 would be. Peyton. 0. What's 3a minus 4 times 0? Graydon.
0.
Oh, okay. What's 8 times 2 minus 3 times t times 0?
0.
Oh. Wait, what's 0 times anything?
0.
0. Does it matter what else there is?
Wait, no. Before you said that anything times 0 is 1.
No.
Anything
What?
power of 0 is 1. Anything to the power of 0 is 1. Anything times 0 will always be 0. Anything times 0 will always be 0.
Worksheet used to those
Did you do it?
Yes, I would actually do
Oh.
I did it. I did this homework.
I know. Instead of throw some shade. Marv's a little sore now from it though.
You're a little salty.
Oh.
Okay. For all numbers a and b, if a times b, any two numbers multiplied together equals 0, then one of them has to equal 0 or both equal 0. So can you ever get two numbers that multiply to 0 and one of them isn't 0? Like 3 times 4 equals 0? No, we have to have a 0 in there, right? For it to equal 0. Okay? Now, is it possible that we can have 0 times 0?
Yes.
What did you get? 0. So we know that at least one of the numbers has to be 0 if we get 0, or it's possible that both are 0. So anytime that an equation equals 0, so anytime these equal 0, at least one of the factors must equal
1 or 0.
0. At least one of the factors had to be 0 in each of these for this to be 0. At least one. Sometimes it can be both, it can be 0 times 0. But at least one of them has to be 0. That's what we call our zero product property. What does product mean? Multiplication. Okay, 0 is the number 0. Product means multiplication. And property just means this is always true. So the zero product property is saying if a product, if multiplication equals 0, then at least one factor is 0. That's all it says. Is that new for us, really?
No.
Might be new for us to say it, but we've known this before. That anything times 0 is 0. So if we get an answer of 0, well, one of them was 0, at least. So this only works for multiplication. I know this is a really tight space.
I'm about to get your pickle chin out, boy.
What?
What?
You've never seen that.
No.
That's what happens when you're okay. Let's give me
This only works for multiplication. So it can't work for addition, subtraction, or division. It only works for multiplication. So we can't just use like x plus y equals 0, so we know one of those numbers is 0. Because somebody give me something that proves that it could be something other than 0 in here.
7.
7 plus
7.
7 plus what would equal 0?
Negative
7.
7.
And are either of these numbers 0?
Nope.
No. But for multiplication, one of them has to be. But for addition, they don't. For subtraction, they don't. Okay? So this only works for multiplication. And the equation must be equal to what number for this to work? 0. Cannot be equal to anything else for this to work.
Hey, in that equation, the 7 plus negative 7, can you just get rid of the addition sign and do 7 minus 7 and it's still 0?
Yes. Okay.
But it's a door. Is there anything different than usual? This is scary.
Schizophrenic.
It's the same freaking door as all the doors.
Okay. So right below this, we have some equations. Woo! Okay. Here. What do we notice this equation is equal to?
0.
0. Hey, do we have multiplication going on?
Yeah.
Yes. There is addition and sign this parentheses, but this is all one big factor. X plus 3 is one big factor. Don't do this part, Mark.
I know how to do it.
And x minus 5 is one big factor, and these two are multiplying to 0. So that means at least one of them must be equal to 0. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to set them both equal to 0. We're going to assume they're both 0. So we know this whole product, at least one of these two, at least, is going to equal 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it to where, well, we know that one of these is 0, so we're going to set x plus 3 equal to 0. And we're going to set x minus 5 equal to 0. Because we're saying if one of those has to equal 0, well, let's make them equal 0. Grace.
But couldn't they like multiply so that they're both like? Don't they have to multiply so that they equal 0?
Yes, and so if they multiply to equal 0, then at least one of them has to be 0.
I know, but what if they have the wrong one? Like, why are you putting both instead of just one?
We'll talk about that. So we'll see why afterwards. Okay, that's a great question. Love that you're asking it, and it'll become a little more clear to us here in a minute. Okay, so we're finding solutions to this equation. This is how we find solutions to quadratic equations. We had solutions to like linear equation before, where we like subtracted, added, multiplied, divided, all that stuff. And now we took this quadratic equation and we created two linear equations. Linear is just x to the power of 1. Okay? How would we solve this one on the left? X plus 3 equals 0. How do you get x by itself? Subtract. And what's x equal? Okay? So I'll circle that as one answer. How would I get x by itself in this right one? And what would x equal?
5.
And those would be our two answers.
So
Oh, we have to do 2 of
wait,
them?
so neither of them are 0?
Well, look at this. Neither of our answers were 0, but our factors end up being it, okay? So write this down, and I'll walk through why this works. Okay? Write this down, and I'll walk through why this works. Hold on to your question for a second,
Wait, so
okay?
these are our
I have
answers, right?
We only need
I
1.
have a question.
Hey. Go ahead.
Okay, so how come, why do you have to do all that whenever you can just learn that it's the opposite of whatever it is?
We'll get there. Okay, yes.
I'm
When we
guessing
do
it's
these,
hard
do
to
we have to do 2 answers or like
We'll
half?
get there. Okay.
Let's just let them
Wait,
work out
wait,
the problem and then we can ask questions.
So
Because, like-
on our worksheets, this
Or
is what you're
not.
looking for. You're looking for the x equals minus 3 or negative 3 and x equals 5. That's the answer?
This is our answer. Yes.
Okay, so that's
Okay.
that's like
Yes. Yeah, that would be your answer. Okay. Now what I'm going to do in red is going to explain why this works. In red, it's explaining why this works. Everyone, hold on a second. Hold those questions for a second. Let me explain why this works here. Okay.
Math is like
So,
science.
So if we can plug in, we know that we can plug in solutions back into the equation and it'll work, right? We know that from linear equations. Like if we found any linear equation, we could plug it back in, it would work, right? Like we could plug this negative 3 back into x plus 3 and it would get 0, right? Because like negative 3 plus 3, well that would be 0, right? Okay, so we can also plug this back in up here for both x's. So if I plugged it in up here, once again, you don't have to do this, but I'm going to. I took this original equation and I just substituted in this negative 3 for x, didn't I? And if I go through and I work on simplifying this, what's negative 3 plus 3 in this first parenthesis? And what's negative 3 minus 5? Negative 8. Okay, and what would 0 times negative 8 be? And so did it work? Yeah, it did. It checked out. So even though this x doesn't equal 0, it equals negative 3, it makes the whole problem 0. Because it makes this first factor 0. So even though our x is negative 3 and not 0, it makes the whole first factor a 0. And if I go through and I do in purple on the next one, and I plug in 5 for both of those x's instead, our second answer, and we go through and simplify, so I just rewrote the same equation, and I put in our second x, 5. 5 plus 3 is 8. Okay, so that's not 0. What's 5 minus 5? And what is 8 times 0? And so does this one work too? So they both satisfy this equation. They both satisfy the equation. They both make it true. So because of that, they're both solutions, which is why they're both answers here. We have two answers for x on this one. Because it is x squared. If we were to multiply this back together, we'd end up having x squared, right? If we FOILed it, our first one, x times x would be x times x would be x squared. So whenever we have something squared, that's how many answers we should get. Whenever we have something squared, that's how many answers we should get. When we just had x to the first, how many answers did we get? 1. And that's because it was x to the first. So that's how many answers we should get. When we have x to the second, we should get 2 answers. And we did. Did that answer some of those questions?
Sure.
Okay. Let's go through the second one here. So 2a plus 5 and a plus 7 equals 0. Do we have multiplication on this left side? Okay. Yes, we do have multiplication on the left side. Those two parentheses are multiplying with each other. And does that multiplication equal 0? Yes. So that means at least one of those factors has to be 0, correct? So we're going to set them both equal to 0 because that will give us our two different solutions. So it's, our first one will be 2a plus 5 is equal to 0. What would our next one be? Someone raise your hand and help me out with this next one. Kale? Very good. A plus 7 is equal to 0. We'll set both of these parentheses equal to 0. Both of these factors equal to 0. So once we do that, we set up our two linear equations, and now we solve these just like we would have all year long. So how do we solve 2a plus 5 equals 0? What would be our first step here? Subtract 5, get rid of that 5. And so we have 2a is equal to negative 5. Now what? Divide by 2. Hey, does negative 5 divide evenly by 2? No.
Oh, actually, no.
But what we can do is we can just write that, can't we?
Oh, yes.
We're fine with improper fractions in here. We're okay with that. Okay? Okay? So this would be one of our answers. Okay? A plus 7 equals 0. How do we solve that?
Minus 7.
And A equals... Hey, did we solve that?
Yeah.
And we have our two answers. And we should, because if we multiplied 2a times a, we would get 2a squared. So we should have two answers. Great.
Can we just find one?
Yeah, it's kind of what I'm
If you just find one, then we need to find both. Because there's two solutions. What?
Why do we need all this?
In higher math, you'll use them. And next chapter we'll use them.
Do you have to take math?
And are we taking the test after this?
Planning on it. I was gonna bring it up in a minute. Yes, Grace.
What if you don't multiply?
What if it's not multiplication? Like, what if it was
Like 4 on
We talked about this.
on number 4? Well, we could look to factor that though, and maybe multiplication. We'll talk about that. Didn't like that answer. Okay. On number 3. Here, do we have multiplication on the left side?
4. Yes.
Yeah, we have 2x minus 7 times x plus 5 times x minus 8. And does it equal 0?
So now we have 3 answers.
So now, how many answers should we have? 3. Okay. 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 I need, you sound a little too excited. I'm gonna need to work on that, Betsy. Okay. It's overwhelming. Okay. So here,
What?
somebody help me set up this first part.
2x minus 7.
Okay, we'll set the first one. 2x minus 7 equal to 0. Somebody help me with the next one. Somebody different. Thank you, Betsy. X plus 5 equals 0. Somebody different.
X minus 8 equals 0.
Thank you, Jacob. X minus 8 equals 0. So now we have our 3 equations. We just set each factor, each parenthesis, equal to 0. Everything that's multiplying its own factor is equal to 0.
Okay, where'd you get 15 from?
It's 5.
Plus 5.
Oh,
Yes.
Can I say 2?
You're going to try and say the last two, aren't you?
Yeah.
Let's hold up a second.
You can automatically short.
2x minus 7 is equal to 0. How do we work on solving this one, Christian? I know.
You divide it?
Not quite. What do we have to do first with the 7?
Oh, move to the other side.
Move to the other side by adding it. Now we have 2x equal to 7, so now what do we do? Now we divide. Does 7 divide evenly by 2?
No.
No, but how can we write
Nah.
this?
7.
3. That's 3 and 1/2.
I mean, you could do that too, but we don't have to. You can just write
Bruh.
7 too. We're okay with that.
What a bruh moment.
Okay. Great.
We're doing this. And we have one just like close by. We just flip the sign.
Okay.
We have to work it all
The same thing Ben wants to ask. Ben, what would this next one be?
-5.
Okay.
And then positive 8. Those are easy.
If you can do this without subtracting the 5, that's okay. Without adding the 8, go ahead. That's fine by
Those are
me.
easy money 'cause you just
So when x equals 1, it's just the.
When there's only a 1 with the x, yeah.
easy
Easier just to do the opposite sign to get it away. So if you catch that, awesome.
Now we
So
can
we had 3 answers, did we?
Yeah.
Could we go back in and plug in every single one of these and they would equal 0?
Yes.
Yeah, it would. Okay, we don't have to. Unless you guys want to.
No.
No.
Oh,
Okay. Okay.
You totally were like squirrel.
Yeah. I'm like, well, maybe they want to. Oh no. Okay. Okay. lame. Hey, so I'm gonna erase some of the stuff I did earlier so we can do example 4. So heads up on that. Why don't you watch this example, then I'll let you go. Cool beans.
It can
Dang.
be some by herself.
Okay, you betcha. Hey, on this number 4, x squared minus 2x minus 10 equals 0. Do we have multiplication on that left side? Oh,
Wait, yes, we do. 3 next.
okay. We get 3 next to multiplying. But here, everything was kind of multiplying with each other, right? The big operation was multiplication. The main thing they were doing was multiplication. Whereas here, are these big things doing multiplication? No, we have multiplication inside of it. So Grace, yeah, the 3 8x are multiplying. That's a great catch. I need to word that differently because that was right. But we need the big thing to need multiplication. So can we do this?
Yes.
How?
You have
Yeah.
to.
We factor. And when we factor, do we create this multiplication that this is?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do we factor this?
So you have to do your x graph.
We have to do our x. How do we know it goes to the top?
More
That's
that's
yay.
that's c times a.
And what goes to the bottom?
I really love doing this.
Okay, so what do we know about the signs here?
They're gonna both be negative.
I disagree.
No.
Negative in the front.
And which number is going to be bigger, the positive or negative?
Negatives.
Negative.
It's gonna be 5 and 2.
5 and 2. Okay, so does negative 5 times positive 2 give us negative 10? Does negative 5 plus 2 give us negative 3? Okay, it checks out. Can we do our shortcut?
Oh yeah.
Yes. We love our shortcut. Somebody tell me how to write the shortcut. Josh, you got this one. Yep. And then what do we have after that now? Equals 0. That's the extra layer. Okay? So far, this is just like a problem we did before, right? We would have just factored that, and we would have called that good. But now we're adding the step where we solve it because it's equal to 0. So now do we have multiplication on the left side
Yes.
that equals 0 on the right? So that means that we can do the zero product property. Somebody tell me how we would do this. Somebody help me set this one up. Ben.
You just flip the signs and then
Okay?
write.
Somebody tell me how we would set this one up though, like this part. Graded.
X minus 5 equals 0, and then x plus 2 equals 0.
Yes. Now, what would you get back?
You just flip the signs and then you get positive x and negative
Positive 5 and
2. Or
negative 5.
positive, yeah.
Very good. You add 5 to both sides on the left, subtract 2 to both sides on the right. Questions on number 4.
Is that
Question-
a veg too?
It is. It's Larry boy.
Larry boy.
We always watch that. We always watch that.
Questions on 4. I want you guys to do 5 on your own.
And I just remember from the last,
Yeah.
like, because one time I did it in front of his house and he said that it smells like the stuff that gas cheese would. I did that for 2 nights.
Wow. It was actually me that said that. That's not surprising. No, she did it. She did it.
Hey, when you're done or have questions, please raise that hand of yours.
How would you even know this smell?
Maybe you
Oh,
lived there in your
no.
second life. Do you believe in like past lives?
What kind of 6 would that be?
That's all.
I do.
I believe that.
Reincarnation.
Okay, what's constant?
Yeah.
Did you hear me?
I'll get you a eraser if I can. Cheers. Devin had it, please. Sorry, we're good. We don't have to go all over for you, buddy. I'll go with you together. Can we do our shortcut on this? Is A equal to 1? Do the shortcut. Can we do the shortcut? So this is correct though. I'm sorry, no, that one should be correct. So that sign should be different. But can we do our shortcut? That's it. When can we do our shortcut?
When it's equals.
So when A equals 1. Is A equal 1? Not 6.
Darn.
Or B is the negative or positive.
When are we gonna finish math?
In advice reasons.
Have we done that, Betsy?
Maybe Mr. Robinson said you, right? Yeah, I'll be calling him today. Wait, actually, let's see if we, do you have like your being like last week on an off day? How lucky.
Oh, to finish my math testing? Finish my math testing? multiple factors of something. I just like I'm doing nothing and then somebody grabs it and twists it and gets all over everybody's like,
You wanna check?
how's that hanging under?
Number 5? Yes.
So I do that.
That's 6 steps.
Just breathe it. I was like, oh, yeah, the reason water is special is for that is water.
Yeah. Instead of 1 times
Like the
negative 10,
white
it's
looked like
negative
it got cut like that. But it's just like.
10. Negative 2 and positive 3. Okay. Now you rewrite it.
My tissues.
Throw away that one.
No tissues out.
I got 230. I got 240.
Hey, let's talk this one up here. Attention up here, please, and thank you. Okay, so on 5, do we start off having multiplication that equals 0? No, that means we need to manipulate this to get there. How do we turn this quadratic equation into multiplication? We look for the factor by making our x. So what is our a and our c? Okay, so 6 times negative 1, so we have to put negative 6 on the top there. And on the bottom, our b is a positive 1, so we put 1 on the bottom. So we need a negative and a positive that multiply to 6, add up to 1. What would those be? Okay, negative 2 and positive 3. So now what would we do? Can we do our shortcut?
Nope.
No, why not?
A does not equal 1.
A does not equal 1. So how would we write this, Justin?
6x squared minus 2x plus 3x plus 1, or minus 1.
And equals 0. Okay? So now we group it. It's important here to note that right now, this is still addition and subtraction. We do not have multiplication yet. We do not have multiplication quite yet. Because when we group this, we still don't have multiplication yet. This is preparing the factor. So we can't just say, oh, we have multiplication, we're ready to set equal. We can't do that. Because we don't truly have multiplication yet. This is just how we set up the factor.
Don't you in between the two parentheses?
Okay. No, this isn't truly multiplication yet because we're going to factor out something and that'll make it that way. This is just preparing it for multiplication. Okay, so once we get here, we cannot set this equal to 0 and like set these equal to 0 and start solving. We have to finish factoring. So once you start the process of factoring, you have to finish it. You can't just quit partway between. We have to finish it here. So we finish it by taking 6x squared minus 2x and we look for our GCF. And what would that be? 2x. And we're left with 3x minus 2. And our next parenthesis, what's our GCF? Just a 1. Very good. And we're left with 3x minus 1. Hey, do we have the same thing in both parentheses? Yeah, that's good news. Ah, okay. So now,
Crazy.
what are we going to do with this?
Plug it in.
Not plug it in. Put
The
it in
parentheses
front.
Hey, that's like plugging.
3 minus 1 and then parentheses 2x.
And we put the other 2 in the parentheses as well. Now, we finish factoring, and now we have multiplication that equals 0. Now, we are able to set these equations up. Does that make more sense?
Yep.
So we have to finish this process of factoring before we can continue. A lot of us got here, set those parentheses, and said, oh, we got multiplication. Not quite, though. You got to finish that process of factoring. Okay? So, what do we do from here? 3x minus 1 and times 2x plus 1 equals 0. How do we set these equations up? Because we'll have to put
3x minus 1 equals 0 and 2x plus 1.
very good. We'll set each parenthesis up equal to 0. Each factor equal to 0. So now we just look to solve these equations. Krista, how would you solve this first one? And then what? Very good. Does that divide evenly? No, but is that a problem? No, what are we going to do? Just write 1 over. Very good. William, how would you solve the second one? 2x plus 1 equals 0. And then you have 2x equals negative 1. What did you do now, William? Very good. And we just write our answer as a fraction. We aren't concerned by that. We just write negative 1 over 2. And those would be our two answers. Could we check our math? Yeah, we can plug them back in. Into this right here or into this right here and originally. And it would work. And hey, how many answers should we have? 2, because it's the power of 2. And how many answers do we have? 2, that's a good sign. What happens if you got one answer? You probably did it wrong. You should check. Questions on that? Okay, hey, on number 6 here. Is this multiplication on the left side?
Nope.
No. How can we get it there? Factor completely. So in this case, factoring completely might look a little different because how many terms do we have? 2. What are we going to look for? We're going to look for a GCF. Do we have one?
Yep.
6x. And that leaves what inside the parentheses?
X minus 3.
Okay. So now, is there anything else we can factor? Okay. Is there multiplication on the left side? Yeah. 6x is being multiplied with x minus 4. And that equals 0. So what we'll do here is, what will we say equal to 0? 6x equals 0 as well as, because how many answers should we have? 2. So we need 2 equations. So now how would you solve this one on the left? Hey, what's 0 divided by literally any number? And how would you solve this one? Question on that one?
I'm not paying attention.
Okay. So here, do we always have to factor by doing our x or difference of 2 squares? No, sometimes it's just a GCF and we're done. Okay, I want you guys to do number 7 on your own. Number 7, I want you guys to do number 7 on your own. You already do it? Number 7 is below there, it's kind of tucked away. Number 7 is right below here. You guys do number 7 on your own. Once you're done or as you have questions, please ask or raise your hand.
Basically like 6.
Yeah. Decently similar. And 5 and 4. I'll be over there in a second. Very good. You want to check? Sure.
My pants button, not the buttons that like.
So there can totally be a civilization in the Earth form.
Totally.
those
The
dangerous
opposite side
or
of
whatever.
it.
No, when we like dive in softball. the
Has
ball,
anyone's
like,
not been
flips
checked yet?
up and it, like stabs you.
Eric,
It's
have
like,
yours been checked?
it really knocks the air out of you.
Yours been checked? Okay, very good. Has yours been checked?
Yeah.
I want to go piercing so bad. I almost pierced mine with one, but
William, was yours checked? All yours checked? Josh, Amber, yours checked? No. Everything's yours checked?
thank God.
I'm not sure.
Alright, attention up here. Thank you. Okay. Hey, how many terms do we have here? Two. What do we want to keep an eye out for when we have two terms?
Two answers.
A GCF, do we have one?
No.
Okay, then what do we want to keep our eye out for? No. Difference of two squares. Whenever we have two terms, we want to look for difference of two squares. Do we have x squared as a perfect square?
Yes.
What's the square root? X. Is 16 a perfect square? What's the square root? Are we taking the difference?
Yes.
Okay, somebody tell me how to write our parentheses then once we have a difference of two squares. Justin.
X minus 4 and X plus 4.
Very good. That's still equals 0. So now we set these equal to 0. So you guys did x minus 4 equals 0 and x plus 4 equals 0. The first one you solve by adding 4. You got x to equal what? Second one you solve by subtracting 4 and you got x to equal
Negative 4.
-4. And how many answers did we get? 2. How many answers should we have? 2. That's good. Questions on that? Like, did you have that before? No. Because you told me you had checked. You told me that Justin checked it. Okay. So, why did you tell me that if it wasn't true? I don't know either. Doesn't like it. Okay. Sometimes we have to rewrite the equation for x equals 0, or for the whole thing to equal 0. So here, on this first equation, does it already equal 0? This first equation, what's the left side, what's the equal on the right side? 5x. But what do we need there for this to work? 0. Because for the zero product property to work, it has to equal 0. So, how can we make this side equal 0? What can we do to move things around? Subtract 5x. Very good. How would I write this on the left side? So, Greg did a good job of making sure this was in standard form as well. He put the x squared, then the 5x, then the 36. Remember we did standard form a couple chapters ago? Make sure we do that. Now, does this look like more of what we had last page? Yeah, it does. Okay. What did we have to do that was different now? What did we have to do that was different so far? Make the other side 0 by subtracting something. So now, do we have multiplication on the left side that equals 0 though? No, so what do we have to do? Factor it. Okay? So we always look for a GCF regardless of how many terms do we have. Do we have a GCF?
Is that minus 5?
Minus 5x. We don't have a GCF. So now that we have 3 terms, what do? Make the x and turn it into factors. So what's going to go at the top of this x? Negative 36, a times c, 1 times negative 36. What goes on the bottom? So 2 factors of negative 36, one's negative, one's positive, that had a difference of 5. 7 add up. Would negative 9 times 4 get negative 36?
Sure.
Would negative 9 plus 4 get negative 5? Okay. Are we able to use our shortcut here?
Yes.
Oh, we can. Why can't we?
Because A equals 1.
Because x squared is not nothing in front of it, a equals 1. We like that. So how would I write this?
So x minus 9 and x plus 4.
Very good. And that equals
0.
0. Now, do we have multiplication that equals 0?
Yeah.
Yes. Betsy, what would we do from here?
You would subtract 9, or you would make your whole equation, so x minus 9 equals 0,
And
x plus 4 equals 0.
very good. We would make our two equations. So x minus 9 equals 0. The first factor equal to 0, and the second factor equal to 0. We set every single factor equal to 0. Okay? So how would you solve this first one now? Okay, add 9 and x is equal to 9. How do we solve the second one?
Minus 4.
And x is equal to negative 4. Questions on that first one? This page. Okay, second one. Is it already set up equal to 0? No. So what do we have to do?
Make it equal 0.
Make it equal 0. Derek, how do we make the second equation equal 0?
I'm not.
Yep. Subtract 16. Because if we take 16 away from both sides, we'll have a squared minus 16 equals what? 0. And is that what we want? Yes. Now does this look a lot more like what we had last page?
Yep.
That's good. We just added in that first extra step of subtracting 16, which we're able to do. Here we subtracted 5x. Second one we subtracted 16. I want you guys to finish solving this on your own. Two. I want you to finish solving on your own. Alright, attention up here. Okay, we want to look to factor to create this multiplication. We factor to create the multiplication here that we need. So we look for a GCF. Do we have one? No. How many terms do we have? 2. So what do we look for with 2 terms? Difference of 2 squares. Is a squared a perfect square? Yeah. What's the square root? A. Is 16 a perfect square? What's the square root? Are we taking the difference? Yes. We have the difference of 2 squares, which is what we look for when we have 2 terms. So what do we write in our parentheses here? Very good. And that's equal to 0. So you set each of these equal to 0 and solve. And you got a to be 4 and a to be -4, correct? Okay. We're gonna skip number 3.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Do number 6 and then that's it.
On to number 4. Jaw. Jaw.
You should actually do that.
Do 4 on wrong.
No, wait,
On number 4. Do we have multiplication? Does it equal 0 though? That's good. So we don't have to make it equal to 0 like we did on these others so far. Okay. What do we look for when we first factor?
3 at the beginning, or how many parts there is.
Greatest common factor. Do we have one, Peyton? What is? It's a. Let's factor out an a. We have a squared minus 13a plus 42. Guys. Thank you. Thank you. Does not help anything. Now we have multiplication, yes, but is this something that we can set equal to 0 and solve right now?
No.
No, we would need to factor more, don't we? So even though we have multiplication equals 0, we can't set this part equal to 0 and solve yet. We still need to factor this inside part more. So we need to go through that before we set the setting equal to 0. We say, oh, we can still factor that. How would we factor this trinomial? Do our a, b, and c, and we would make our x. And we'll go to the top of this x. And at the bottom, so we have 2 negative numbers that multiply to 42, add up to 13. Okay, 7 and 6. Very good. So we'll write this. We're able to use our shortcut, a minus 7 and a minus 6. But what did I have out in front? That a. And how many answers should we have here?
3.
3. Because what was our original power? 3 to the 3rd. So how many equations do I need here? 3. Can somebody help me with the first equation?
So a equals 0.
Yeah, we just said this first part, a equal to 0. Second equation.
A minus 7 equals 0.
Third.
A minus 6.
Is this first equation already solved for us?
Yes.
Think. Second equation, we add 7 and we get a equals.
A equals 7.
Third equation, we add 6 and we get a equals
6.
6. So once again, we check, hey, we should have 3 answers. We have 3 answers. What? Just this. So you just said this part, a, is equal to 0. So like, do you remember on the last page when we had like the 6x as our GCF or a 4x as our GCF and we had that equal to 0? Same thing. Here we just have the a equal to 0. Thank you for asking. Other questions? Okay. One other thing I want to look at. Let's look at number 5 together. Let's look at this one briefly together here. Okay. So here, is this equal to 0?
No.
No, we didn't make it that way. How do we make this equal to 0? Subtract 20. So we'll write this 2x squared plus 6x minus 20 equals 0. Now is this equal to 0?
Yes.
And what do we look for when we factor? Greatest common factor. Do we have one?
Yes.
What is it?
2.
X squared plus 3x minus 10 is equal to 0. Okay? So now, once again we have multiplication, but could we set this whole middle part up equal to 0 yet? No, we need to factor that more by making our x. Negative 10 on the top, 3 on the bottom. We'll have,
-2, 5.
very good. We can do our shortcut. I know I'm going a little quick into this one. So now, how many answers should we have here? Two. But wouldn't we have kind of three equations? Let's look at this. So this first equation, you'd set up this greatest common factor 2 equal to 0, and we'll talk about that. Then we'll do x minus 2 equal to 0, and x plus 5 equal to 0. And as we go through these equations, does 2 equal 0? No. Will it ever equal 0? No. So you just put not equal and call that one good. Don't circle it, it's not an answer. You only have two answers, that's not one of them. Here we'll add 2 and we'll get x equals 2. We'll subtract 5 and get x equals negative 5 here. And those would be your two answers. So you just get a 2 out there. 2 will never equal 0. You say 2 equals 0? No, it doesn't. You call life good. Justin.
So if there's a GCF of an actual number, you could just drop it.
Essentially. Yep. Alright, we're going to skip over number 6. Ja. Hey, class, heads up. Do we have class tomorrow?
Nope.
No, when do we have our next class?
Monday.
Monday, okay. So what I'm looking at is testing next Wednesday, my dudes. Testing next Wednesday, my dudes, okay? Hey, there's a couple don't do's on here. You might want to know real quick.
Yay, homework.
I know.
Just be grateful
It's
that
all stuff
This is
there.
how I would do that.
It'd be lucky it's not a Howard factor.
Okay. Attention up here real quick for don't do's. Don't do. Thank you. Don't do numbers 1 and 3. Okay. Don't do numbers 1 and 3. Have a great day and have a great weekend. Yes. Pencils, can you come back to me, please and thank you? I'll return your goods.
Derek, pay attention.
Thank you.
You betcha.